When people see a fully automated agency from the outside, it looks like everything happens on its own. New prospects appear, conversations start, projects get created, deliverables get generated, and clients stay engaged without anyone pushing the process forward. And while it does look automatic, the truth is that nothing inside a fully automated agency happens by accident. It follows a flow, a sequence, a chain of decisions and actions that always happens in the same order. Not because someone is managing it, but because the system itself is designed to move work through each phase without hesitation. In this video, I want to break down exactly how that flow works, step by step. Not the tools, not the features, but the actual movements inside the agency that allow it to operate on its own. Everything starts with detection. The agency begins working long before a client shows up. The system constantly monitors signals, content engagement, behavioral patterns, messages, profile relevance, timing, alignment. When enough of these signals stack up, the system recognizes someone as a potential fit. It doesn't need a name. It doesn't need a meeting. It doesn't need permission. It just identifies the pattern. And the moment that pattern appears, the flow begins. This is the first step, detection. The second step is classification. Once the system detects someone who matches the pattern, it immediately classifies them. Not by guesswork, but by analyzing their profile across multiple dimensions. What industry they're in, what problems they might have, what type of solution they would need, how advanced they are, what outcome they want. The system tags them, scores them, and determines what track they belong to. Because the flow changes depending on the track. Some people need more context. Some people need more clarity. Some people are closer to action. Classification makes sure the next step of the flow fits them perfectly. The third step is activation. Once the system knows which track someone belongs to, it begins the first interaction. Not a random message, not a generic template, a context-aware introduction based on the classification. It explains the system briefly, it opens a conversation, it creates alignment, and most importantly, it does all of this automatically. No manual outreach, no manual follow-up. Activation is timed, structured, and executed with precision because the system doesn't rely on emotion or energy. It relies on logic. The fourth step is interaction. This is where most agencies fall apart because they rely on inconsistent communication. But here, interaction follows a predictable pattern. The system asks questions, gathers information, responds to behavior, adjusts tone, and builds clarity. It uses the answers to refine classification. It adapts to objections. It identifies what the person actually needs. And the entire time, the system is listening for the moment when someone crosses the threshold from curiosity to intent. When that happens, the flow instantly moves to the next step. The fifth step is preparation. This is where the automated agency becomes different from every traditional model. Instead of waiting for someone to become a client, the system begins preparing the foundation ahead of time. It gathers context, it builds a project skeleton, it loads relevant templates, it analyzes the prospect's industry, it creates an outline of what the deliverable might look like. Nothing final yet, but enough of a head start that when conversion happens, the system doesn't need to begin from zero. It already has momentum. Preparation turns the future project into something real before it officially exists. The sixth step is conversion. But in the automated agency, conversion isn't a dramatic event. It's a checkpoint, a confirmation. The system already knows what the person needs. It already knows if they are qualified. It already has the project skeleton. Conversion simply unlocks the next phase of the flow. And because everything has been prepared, conversion feels effortless. There's no friction, no confusion. The moment someone becomes a client, the system shifts into delivery instantly. The seventh step is generation. The delivery engine starts generating the first version of the work, not randomly, not as a generic draft, but using the skeleton created during preparation. The system pulls data. It analyzes the client's requirements. It uses refined templates. It creates a structured first version of the deliverable that already looks close to completion. This is what removes the heavy workload, because once the first version exists, everything else becomes refinement instead of creation. The eighth step is refinement. This step is what makes the agency feel human. The system reviews the draft. It compares it to quality standards. It checks clarity, tone, structure, arguments, depth, and accuracy. It identifies gaps. It runs multiple iterations. Each iteration improves the previous one. And the system doesn't stop until the deliverable meets the threshold defined in the architecture. Refinement is the part that transforms the first version from good to polished. And because it's iterative, it gets better over time. The ninth step is personalization. This is where context becomes important. The system adapts the deliverable based on the client's tone, niche, preferences, and previous work. It adjusts voice, it adjusts structure, it adjusts weight. It makes the deliverable feel custom even though the workflow is automated. Personalization is what makes clients feel understood. It's what creates trust. It's what separates an automated agency from a cheap automation. The system doesn't just produce work, it produces aligned work. The 10th step is packaging. This is where the deliverable becomes something ready for the client. The system formats it, organizes it, structures it, creates summaries, adds clarity, builds visual elements if necessary, packages it into the format that fits the service. Nothing messy, nothing unfinished. Packaging makes the deliverable feel premium. The 11th step is communication. Once the deliverable is ready, the system sends the update. It explains what was done, why it was done, what the next step is, and what the client should expect. It does this clearly and simply. Clients never feel lost. They never feel like something is missing. Because communication is tied directly to events inside the flow. When something happens, the system communicates. And because it communicates at the right time, it increases perceived quality. The 12th step is feedback. The system listens. It evaluates the client's reaction. It analyzes what they liked, what they didn't mention, what they asked for, what they corrected. Feedback becomes data, and that data goes into the learning system. This is where the agency improves. Every project makes the next project better. Every refinement makes future outputs stronger. Feedback becomes fuel for evolution. The 13th step is retention. Retention is not a separate task. It's part of the flow. The system monitors results, looks for opportunities, suggests improvements, initiates check-ins, recommends renewals. Clients stay because the system stays active. They feel supported without needing manual attention. Retention makes the agency stable, and stability is what allows the flow to continue without interruption. The final step is looping. When retention happens, the flow restarts. Not from step one, but from the appropriate entry point. Sometimes the system begins with detection again. Sometimes it begins with preparation. Sometimes it begins with refinement. The flow is not a single line. It's a cycle, a repeating engine that moves through phases depending on what the client needs. And because the flow is consistent, the agency remains consistent. When you look at the full flow, you start to understand why the agency feels automatic. It's not a tool. It's not a trick. It's the result of a sequence that never breaks. Detection leads to classification. Classification leads to activation. Activation leads to interaction. Interaction leads to preparation. Preparation leads to conversion. Conversion leads to generation. Generation leads to refinement. Refinement leads to personalization. Personalization leads to packaging. Packaging leads to communication. Communication leads to feedback. Feedback leads to retention. Retention leads back to the flow. The reason this works is simple. Every step is predictable. Every transition is deliberate. Every decision is structured. The system doesn't wait. It doesn't hesitate. It doesn't forget. It moves. And because it moves, the agency moves. Not when I tell it to, but because the architecture and the flow make it inevitable. In the next video, I'll break down the actual decision logic inside the flow. How the system knows what to do, how it chooses the right moment, how it decides when to act. Because the flow is only powerful when the decisions behind it are clear. And once you understand that, you start to see automation not as something that replaces work, but as something that replaces friction.